everyone. Wow, tough act to follow. Jason's keynote, these two panels, and especially after the creativity and imagination of the last panel, we all imagined ourselves taking a trip to Neptune, and I think our panel will now gently bring us back to Earth. We will be talking about the funding aspect and the investor's perspective. Don and Amitt, you're technology investors with particular interest in AR and VR. How did you find yourselves in this space?
So in late 2014 is when I first realized kind of the potential to change the world with virtual reality and what it can do really for healthcare and education specifically. And so I kind of beelined out to California. I'm originally from the Midwest. And I slept on a bunch of couches until I met the right person who was a founder of a venture fund. He brought me on board. We added 13 AR, VR companies to the portfolio while I was there. But then, like any entrepreneur, I got kind of antsy and wanted to do it myself. And so I left. I started a syndicate on AngelList and put together 10 deals in virtual reality. The first of those deals was a company called Upload VR. That was about a year and a half ago, and I've been blown away and impressed by what they've been able to do as founders. And so I ended up partnering with them, and we've now launched Upload Ventures officially last week, and just made our first investment. So it's an exciting time.
I started getting kind of interest in VR and even 3D graphics from a young age. I used to play a bunch of video games. This game called Quake and Doom, and basically grew up idolizing Oculus's now CTO, John Carmack. And so my career was mostly in gaming and 3D graphics. And then I left and started two companies. The first one was a social gaming company. We ended up building the game Farmville, and that was bought by Zynga. And then the second one was a mobile marketing company that I worked on that was acquired by Google. And so after leaving Google, I was kind of jaded a little bit and worn out from being an entrepreneur. So I decided, I should take a break. But VR is kind of a combination of my background in 3D graphics and then working with new platforms. So I knew that I had to do something and that I would just have insane FOMO if I didn't. So rather than start something, I just couldn't come up with a good enough idea. I decided instead, why don't I just invest in all the really smart people that are starting to get interested in the space. So I got together with my partners, one of which was the creative agency Vive, this guy Phil Chen, and we put together the world's first VR and AR focused venture fund called Presence Capital. So far, we've done about 26 investments in VR and AR. We're one of the most active investors in the world in this space, almost all seed stage. We're investors in Meta, who I guess is speaking later today. And so we've seen a lot of stuff. I've personally maybe seen about 300 companies in virtual reality and augmented reality. So.
We heard the perspectives today of entrepreneurs, the creative community, technologists about what AR and VR are. How about the investor's perspective? From an investor's perspective, what is augmented reality? What is virtual reality? And do you see any difference in these terms in various industries and geographies?
Yeah, so I think, as an industry right now, VR is kind of a catch-all term. As you've probably seen from the panelists up here today, there's kind of like video VR, which is 360 VR, and VR using your phones. Then you have the high-end VR, which is like the Oculus and the HTC Vive. And then on the AR side, it's almost all computer vision type stuff. So we're seeing a lot of different things across and uses for these technologies across industries and even geographies. So for us, even though I'm a big believer in VR, I try to be fairly realistic about the timing on the consumer end. So because this stuff is so expensive, because it's so much work to put these headsets on, I basically think that consumer VR is likely going to come first from your mobile phone, and it'll likely be maybe 2 to 3 years before it's mass market. A couple things need to happen. One is we need to wait to see what Apple does, which is going to be a huge, huge industry change when it happens. So given that it's so far away, most of our focus recently has been on using VR to solve business applications. So, like things like training or like simulation. So for us, a lot of the investments that we've been making lately have been in those fields, and some of those companies are making revenue today. So there are opportunities today to make money in VR, but it's mostly on the B2B side from what we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two trends here are visual technologies and spatial technologies, and VR, AR are a part of that umbrella, but so is 3D, computer vision, 3D web VR, I guess, is a little different in a lot of ways. WebGL I would consider, which is what enables 360 and 3D inside of your browser. So I think that it's a lot bigger than just VR, AR. I think it's kind of this whole revolution moving towards visual technologies and visual interfaces. And so that includes a lot of different buckets. But the platforms ultimately, and then whenever it does happen, and I'm a skeptic as well on the timeline, I think the platforms will be AR, VR headsets where these computer vision and 3D web and all these different bits that we're talking about are going to eventually live. But I think in the short term, kind of the opportunity is to fund those bits of the pipeline and wait for the install base to increase and for more headsets to actually get purchased, and then start to look into opportunities that rely on the consumer to actually own a headset at the home. But to your point, I 100% agree there is huge opportunity for headsets in the enterprise for business solutions, because you don't need that scale of 100 million daily active users. You can basically just have the executive suite be the active users or whoever's going to be frequently using it.
Let's talk more about the notion that I believe there's consensus today that AR and VR are emerging technologies, and this is an emerging industry. Is now the right time for entrepreneurs to consider this opportunity?
I definitely wouldn't have raised a fund if I didn't believe that. And I also asked my father, put in capital, to make sure that I truly did believe that. And obviously a small amount, but I just wanted to kind of have that mindset where you really do need to make money, and I think there are opportunities to make money. But again, if it's a play that is specifically only in a headset, then I think it's tough on the consumer side, and it makes sense to stay on the B2B solution side. And so if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for opportunities and you want to build for a headset, I think it's very important that you're kind of bridging that gap between when there's enough headsets that exist and currently.
So, we're seeing some folks on the enterprise side start to sell into larger companies, some of which are doing millions of dollars of revenue a year, to give you an idea of the scale. So there's the opportunities there, and the way to think about it is that, like, if you're solving a problem for a business, the form factor and the cost of the hardware doesn't really matter if you're like 10xing the ability for someone to do something. So here's an example. We have a company called Scope AR, and what they do is they use augmented reality software, and they work on your cell phone, or they also work on like a headset, and they superimpose like instructions on top of machinery. So if I'm looking at like an engine, it'll say like, go ahead and put the wrench here and rotate it and pull the nut out. And basically, as a person, I don't have to actually know what I'm doing to do something that's very technically complicated. So if you're like if you're like Caterpillar, who is one of their customers, you can potentially provide the software to your customers, and now they're able to maintain their own machinery without having to call a technician. So it's solving a massive business need for them. We have one more example is we have another company that is selling VR simulations of medical devices, but they're not selling it to doctors as you would think. They're selling it to medical device companies as a sales tool for their salespeople. So now if I'm selling like an MRI machine, I don't need to fly people out to demo the machine or potentially have to schedule time with it. I can just have a VR system that I bring with me, and now when I go to a hospital, I set this thing up, I can put the hospital staff in it, they can immediately see what it's like to use the machine, get a sense of the scale and so on, without ever having to work with the physical machine. So, if you're selling a $100,000 plus machine, you're gonna spend $2,000 on a PC and a VR kit in order to make that sale. That pays for itself. So, things like that are these kind of unique use cases for VR that we're seeing today, and that have huge potential to actually be big businesses now.
On that point, I was in Michigan last week, And I was at a high school, and a very young student came up to me, and he was basically telling me what he has built for the HTC Vive, and I was just blown away. And what he's essentially done is his school couldn't afford a lot of the equipment that they needed to build out a proper science lab. And so he ended up building that lab that he wanted in VR, and is now working with his school to have an actual like HTC Vive room where they're able to now go and run experiments inside of this lab that this high school student has built without needing to spend the $100,000 for some of this $100,000 for some of this equipment. So I thought that was a really, really cool use case, and it's on your point of kind of it's actually cheaper to purchase VR in that case and to build something out digitally. Another good example on that same note is a company called Soundstage. So they allow you to basically start in a room. It's all black. You turn to your wrist and you can start to select speakers. You can put a speaker over here. You can build out an entire recording studio inside of a headset. And then you can export that MP3. And so, I mean, I don't know exactly what a recording studio costs, but I imagine it's a lot more than HTC Vive and moving some furniture around. So that's really compelling, is kind of how are you replacing physical equipment with digital room scale assets. I think that is an opportunity for prosumers if you're a prosumer.
As investors, how do you approach evaluating an AR or VR investing opportunity?
So we invest very early stage, and that's kind of by design. So much stuff is changing. Like a few weeks ago, Oculus had their F8, annual F8 event, and they basically just like threw a bomb in the middle of the AR industry by announcing their camera platform and all this like AR stuff they're doing, and it completely shifted the landscape. So essentially what we need to do is we're not really investing in ideas as much as we're investing in people, and I know that sounds super cliche, I'm sure you guys have heard this 1,000 times before from investors, but we're specifically looking for two things. One is the ability to roll with the punches. So as the landscape is changing, the ability to adapt and very quickly change your strategy as new things are happening. Because this is a rapidly evolving industry, it's very hard to say like this one company is going to be the thing that ends up blowing up and is going to be the next massive company. Instead, it's easier to say, okay, these people are really impressive and they're able to adapt very quickly. So we know that as long as they're thinking critically and strategically, they'll be able to figure out the right path forward. The second thing, and I kind of learned this from my entrepreneurial days, is it's not about your runway or how much time you have, how much money you have in the bank, and how long you can survive financially. It's about your own ability to stay motivated and passionate about the thing you're building. And so there's a really good book called Grit by Angela Duckworth. It's awesome and basically describes this trait, which is the ability just to continue to persist and like believe that what you're building should exist. And then pair that with the adaptability I mentioned before, and you have the traits you need to be a really great entrepreneur in a fast and rapidly evolving field. And so that's what we look for primarily.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable book. Really good book. So I agree. I mean, I think survive and advance is something that you have to have. You have to be in that mindset if you're in the industry, because it is about surviving and advancing, and there is going to come a time period where the floodgates open, and if you're there and you're well positioned, it's going to be a great opportunity to make money and impact. So 5 things I look for, just real quick. Market, very, very interested in researching history of different markets for comparable opportunities, even in a 2D world. Timing, so I'd like to look at trends that are happening, web VR, enterprise AR, things like that, and focused on that timing. Risk mitigation and how it fits in our portfolio. So if the entrepreneur has done something intelligent to bridge the gap between the small install base and somehow finding scale, i.e. relying on the web or on a smartphone, I'm attracted to those types of opportunities. Team, of course, very important, probably the most important, because they're the ones that are keeping everything together. And then third-party references and co-investors. So it's really important to validate with other AR, VR investors as well as VCs that don't know too much about AR, VR, because an opportunity is an opportunity, and when an opportunity gets hot, everyone's going to want in, and so it's really good to kind of correlate with those different people. And then I think something that's important is like, I get a lot of pitches for gaming, and I am public that I'm not interested in gaming investments. I want something that's a little more on the education or healthcare side of the VR. So I think it's really important to there are right investors that as soon as you walk in the door, they've been looking for that opportunity and they're willing to jump on it. And then there's ones that they won't, no matter how good your sales pitch is, they won't, buy into your vision. And so I think it's really important also to pitch the right type of investor, the right type of idea that they are looking for, he or her.
So let's continue this conversation a little further. What practical advice do you have for entrepreneurs who want to enter the AR and VR space?
So I think we've been in the industry, I guess, 3 years or something, the last 3 years. And so if you haven't been in the industry for the last 3 years, you have an advantage. And the advantage is that you know the industry you've been working in way better than we do. And so if you're an entrepreneur and you are working in the real estate industry for the past 3 years, and you were to meet someone that is working within the AR, VR space for the past 3 years, that's a magical combination at this time because it's taking someone that is really motivated and helped build out this industry, and it's taking someone who knows the problems of the real world. And if you can combine those, then you can, I believe, kind of yin and yang and come up with some really interesting breakthroughs.
I'd say keep your expectations grounded. Mm-hmm. We get pitched a lot about folks who just are building stuff and believe that unlike the web and unlike mobile, there's no forcing function here for VR, right? We all adopted smartphones because we're going to upgrade our phones anyways, and just kind of by default. We ended up getting a smartphone, even if you were, resistant, eventually almost everyone's cracked, right? And so, unlike that, there's really no reason to every day use VR. There's very few daily active usage apps. So making these kind of false, it's like false equivalence to say that, VR is going to be like mobile. AR maybe, but I think it'll be fairly obvious by the time it is. So anyone that's considering entering the space now, the practical advice that we've given almost all of our entrepreneurs is keep your burn low, raise enough money to last. Normally the leading advice for seed stage companies is raise between 12 and 18 months of runway. We actually advise 18 to 24 months, just because of the inability to actually monetize, especially on the consumer side. On the AR side, to give some context, almost everything we're doing is computer vision. And a lot of that's deep, hard technology. And the thing with deep, hard technology is that it usually takes longer than you think. And so, again, it just comes back to, keeping burn low and just persisting. And so that's kind of what, the winning formula that we've seen thus far. And then a little bit of predictions, I think there's going to be a couple companies that end up flaming out this year. Big ones that have raised a lot of money. So I'm sure it's going to be public, and I'm sure people are going to be like, oh my God, VR is dead. But honestly, I think it's good.
As investors, both of you enable entrepreneurs to dream big. I want to give you the opportunity yourselves to dream big today. What pressing big societal problems of today do you think AR and VR can solve?
So I'm a huge believer that there's actually, I'll do two. All right. The first one is that on the VR side, that VR has been called an empathy machine before. And we have a portfolio company that's basically using VR for soft skills training. So rather than teaching you how to use machinery or something of that nature, they're teaching people, they did a project recently with the UN where they create a salary negotiation simulator. And the idea behind that was to help close the gender pay gap. So, as people are using this, they can, basically be put in a situation where they're the hiring manager and learn how to respond to that situation so that when they go and they do in the real world, there's more familiarity, they're more comfortable with that. Folks are using, in that same vein, they've also done something where they're providing simulations for, rather than for doing sexual harassment and gender unconscious bias compliance. So it's the sort of thing if you go and you start a job at Google, you're forced to take all of these modules, and it's usually a web page that you go through and you like say like, okay, yeah, I understand the situation. I shouldn't do this and I shouldn't do that. Instead, you're put in a VR environment or a 360 environment where you're potentially the one on the receiving end of that, or the one actually doing it, and it's meant to make you feel uncomfortable. And that sort of immersion is not something you can get anywhere else. So the idea that you can be put in someone else's shoes and feel that empathy is something that's brand new to VR, and I think it's going to be one of the more powerful applications of VR. The second one is that, as I mentioned before, there's this company, Scope AR, that is essentially doing, like showing you how to perform technical tasks without having any knowledge. So, there's this thesis, and the thesis of that company is that eventually, folks that are potentially losing their jobs because of automation, are in situations where they're losing their primary form of income because of all the stuff that's happening with robotics. Normally, people are kind of hand waving what's going to happen. Maybe people will go back to school, maybe they'll go and get retrained. But I think there's a future in which potentially give someone a VR headset and say, today you're doing this thing that you've never done before, and you're going to essentially act as maybe you're unskilled, but you can still perform this job. And either it's a remote expert that's telling you what to do, or it's a computer giving you instructions. So it essentially has the ability to help people transition from one career to another more fluidly without having to go and be retrained. And I think that has the impact of allowing people to maintain their lifestyles as a result.
Don?
I think if, let's say, you're a 5-year-old girl today and you kind of project out what your life's going to be like over the next 10 years, 15 years, I would imagine by the time that she gets into maybe middle school, cardboards are pretty widespread, or some sort of low-end VR device is widespread within the education system. And so she'll be able to go on safaris, she'll be able to get up close to a molecular level directly in school. And then I think she's going to move on to high school, and I think when she has to do her driver's ed training, there'll be a VR portion where she'll have to have a certain amount of hours in the VR headset because it's safer than putting someone who's never actually drove a car out on the road. And then I think she'll go on to college and she'll go to get a job, and just like I think that's Barry's company you're talking about, there'll be some sort of training mechanism for her to basically have a score in the interview process of how well she went through one of her days virtually before she was ever actually hired, and you can get insights. And so I think that's like a really compelling world where kind of VR, it shows the transcendence of it. And then also, my little sister is actually working on a VR company. She has dyslexia, and so what she's doing is she's gone around to her school and she's giving them experiences that put the teacher in the position of the student in the back of the class who's trying to read and feels, in her words, stupid because she doesn't know how to read that well, even though she's an intelligent person. And so she's going around and enabling empathy within schools. So I think, yeah, it does revolve a lot around empathy, and I think that's how it's gonna, empathy and presence, which is a great fun name, is kind of gonna be the two things that stem from this technology, I believe.
And before we wrap up, we have a question from our audience. Oh, please go ahead.
I think mental illness is a problem that we can tackle with VR as well. I lost a friend to it, unfortunately, and I think that the amount of again, presence and empathy that you can create with these headsets can really kind of put someone in a different mindset, and so it's important that people are working on that as well, and not gaming.
We have a request from our audience to comment on real-time AR, VR, and the example that is given here is to see using someone else's eyes in this very moment, what someone else is seeing, for example, a sunset in Hawaii or the Niagara Falls. Could you comment on that aspect as an investor in the AR and VR industry?
Sure. I think one of the most I've shown VR to a lot of people at this point, and I'm originally from Chicago. It's a big sports town, and I've my high school friends. I showed them a bunch of different demos, and the one that resonated the most was the Next VR stuff, where you're basically at a basketball game and you're able to watch live events. I think that that is kind of like no Yeah, my no-brainer, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm trying to watch my language. But the idea of being half court at like a basketball game, or being right up in front at a concert is just such a easy, obvious use case for this stuff that I think what's cool is that all the infrastructure is being built right now by Twitter and by Facebook for the live streaming. So hopefully we just add the 360 side of it, and now we're off to the races. Yeah, and I think I'm a millennial, and so maybe this is a biased opinion, but I am a big believer in Snap's mission. And if you're unfamiliar with the Snap spectacles that they came out with, it allows me to click a button very similar to how you click a camera on the top of my pair of glasses, it looks just like a pair of glasses, and it starts to record. And if you're viewing it from your phone, you can not only watch it when your phone is horizontal, but if you turn it sideways, they have figured out a technique that allows you to basically spin your phone in a circle, and the whole entire circle has some sort of visual input. I'm sorry, I can't explain it very well, it's tough. But where I foresee that going is that I can go to a concert and put on my regular pair of glasses, which again, they do look like a regular pair of glasses, and I can go front row, and I can make money by having my friends, or not my friends, people I don't know, buzz in and basically watch from my perspective from the front of a concert in real time. So I think where the Snap spectacles are going is that turns into probably a 90-degree to 180-degree capture. And so when you can click this, other people can independently go in and beam into your vision and independently look left and right. Whether you're looking left or right, it doesn't matter. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity, and I do think Snap is going to be in the forefront of head-mounted cameras. Yeah.
We'll leave the another for another day because we're out of time.
Thank you.
Amitt, Don, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.